Welcome to the Institute for Human Sciences here in Vienna and to the final event of this year's Europe's Futures Fellowship that we were supposed to hold live and with people in this magnificent library. As everyone, we are virtual, but we'll be also half physical because we have some of our fellows here. My name is Ivan Vejvoda and I'm a permanent fellow, and I head the Europe's Futures Fellowship, which is a project that is in strategic cooperation with the Erste Stiftung here in Vienna. And I'd like you to see how this all started.
Very warm welcome to you, the first fellows of this partnership between IWM and Erste Foundation. We started this discussion with Ivan about 1.5 years ago, and finally we came to the conclusion that the best thing that our both institutions can do is to give freedom and an opportunity to people whom we believe in, that they can make a difference if they come up with their perspectives and their solutions and their ideas, how we can further develop this continent.
So the past couple of years have been soul-searching years about the politics of the countries I come from.
I'm by far the oldest fellow. I'm even older than Andreas.
I'm delighted and privileged to be part of this program. I'm very thankful to the Erste Foundation.
I am going to study and research and write about the future.
I'm actually the Balkans correspondent of The Economist, and I have been for some time.
We want to influence the debate on Europe, to give very concrete policy proposals. So as you saw, this is how we began in 2018. As you saw, we had a first group of fellows that you heard from. This is the ending of this second year. We're planning a third year as well. And the subtitle of our project, Europe's Futures, is Ideas for Action. We find ourselves at the intersection of academia and policy. We want to be impactful, and all the fellows that have been with us have been people who, in their own right, have their day jobs at a variety of institutions, and we cover the whole of Europe, north and south, east and west, and we're very proud to have that balance of the different regions and parts of this wonderful continent that we live in.
Grigorij, nice to meet you, man. So, this is the place.
As you see, there are 4 of us here physically in Vienna, but from different parts of the continent, and you will soon meet the other fellows who could not be here physically but are with us thanks to this wonderful contraption called Zoom that we have all become acquainted with in these past months that we were actually hit by a virus that we will be talking about in a variety of ways. As I said, we pride ourselves that we have the different views and different angles and the different viewpoints from the European continent. And I will be introducing one by one the fellows. And the first fellow that comes to us actually from Sarajevo, but is in Vienna now, is Alida Vracic, with whom we go quite a long way back in our various activities in the Balkans. And I'd like to pick up the conversation where we actually left Alida. We talked about, I think, your project, which is extremely important and timely and in a way dramatic, and that is about the movement of people in Europe, and especially the movement from Southeastern, Central and Eastern Europe, from member states and candidate states to find better lives. People are simply seeking a way where they can fend for their families and their children. You have studied very carefully this issue of circular migration, i.e., how can both recipient and origin countries benefit from the expertise and social capital that these people carry. How have you found your work during this year? Have you made headways into how this can become better and not only a one track of people going in one direction to another?
To be honest, I think it has become even more, there is more clarity even, if you will, when it comes to this topic, because we have seen during the pandemics that things that I have been discussing and researching, for example, departures of doctors, medical staff from the region, from the Western Balkans, but also Southeast Europe, has become so intense and so visible in a way that we had no doctors in place actually in the Western Balkans to be able to have this medical safety and security, if you will. At the same time, it clarified that circular migration is exactly what we need in terms of policies, very direct way of how to make these benefits in a way portable. So if you work somewhere and if you live somewhere else, you can still find yourself in between the countries and basically enjoy the benefits of one and contribute to the other one. I think the diaspora that we're discussing in the Western Balkans is 6 million strong. This is a conservative assessment. Imagine the strength these people could have, being able to commute and being able to sort of bring, technological advances into the region, and at the same time, basically having a possibility of exposure and working everywhere else.
You and I are examples of this circular migration because you are from Sarajevo but are living here. You go backwards and forwards, as I do, working here, go back to my hometown, Belgrade.
Absolutely.
Is that anything that, how many such examples do you see out there?
I think we see quite few, and between two of us, we have discussed some concrete examples of our friends. And I mean, I've been commuting from the region and back and forth for education, for different purposes. I think it's absolutely, it makes perfect sense, because it would be an illusion to think that you can keep people in one place. People are talented, they're young, they want this exposure, they want to travel, they want to see something. And they should be even, in my view, encouraged to do so. But they should be offered some sort of environment to anchor themselves back if they're willing to. My perception is that the question of immigration is only, being portrayed one-dimensionally, and it's not, because there are so many good things about it. There are so many benefits that we haven't even started discussing, and this is the aim, I guess, of what I want to do in my research.
So, as I said, the subtitle of this project is Ideas for Action. There is a responsibility of the recipient countries. What do you think the other side, those who are receiving, not only doctors, but my electrician from Belgrade left to go and work in Germany because he'll get 4 times the salary. You're thinking of putting people together for a meeting to brainstorm on the mutualization of the responsibility.
I think there is a responsibility, absolutely, especially because countries that we're discussing, so Germany, Austria, Slovenia, countries in the neighborhood are very much invested politically in the region. So everything that goes wrong in the region will backfire one way or the other. We have seen that now with doctors, because in any of the cities of the Western Balkans, you have a situation where you have a doctor who is, instead of treating 15 patients, has to treat 150 patients. In smaller places like in Bosnia, in certain towns and cities, you have a situation that there are no certain types of doctors anymore, and this is something that could be I think from a policy perspective, that could be bypassed quite easily just by relaxing the portability of basically benefits among different countries. And it could be done bilaterally, it could be done in a European framework, and this has happened before. We had these examples in the 70s with gastarbeiters. We had these similar frameworks also being sort of conceptually envisaged on the European level. This is something that we have to start discussing immediately, I guess.
So finally, do you think that this fellowship has given you the possibility to drill much deeper, but also to alert, to have impact on those with whom you have talked, from Ireland to Germany to your home country?
As you know, I've done research on Ireland, but Ireland is really hardly the only example. There are so many examples out there that we can learn from a policy perspective. At the same time, this fellowship proved once more that we need to start immediately, because fruits of this work we can only see in 10, 20, 30 years' time. As soon as we start, we can build up on this story, and we have to, it has to be a top-down kind of approach, but it also can include civil society, it should include all people, it should include academics, engineers, IT experts, everyone and anyone who's interested in this kind of relations with the country. Because one thing that I've learned is that you can be angry at your country, you can be angry at the politics in your country, but you leave this bond with your country and your people and your family. I mean, just by judging by the level of remittances, one can conclude so. So it absolutely leaves a space that is being, at the moment, not filled in with enough policies.
Okay, well, thank you, Alida. So you feel confident that you will be able to actually chug along and give all that you've received here and take it forward, working with the other fellows and the networks that you've created.
Absolutely. This is, I think, just the beginning of the story, to be honest.
Thank you, Alida. So we go now to Paris to meet our next fellow, Nicole Milanese, who has been working on an equally interesting and challenging topic, which is as old as the continent is, and that is the issue of Europe and its boundaries, or its boundlessness, in the sense of the universal values that this continent has purported, but also the reckoning now that we're seeing with not only movements like Black Lives Matter, the whole decolonization and realization that Europe, apart from the wonderful things that it's done, has done also a lot of evil in the world, slavery being one of them, and is reckoning with. Nicolo, tell us in a few words, sitting where you are, and with the immediate sort of reflection on current events, on the broader issues. France just had a second round of local elections where the Greens had a very great success. And we know that climate is a boundless issue. It's without borders. How do you think that within the framework of your topic, what you saw last night in the results, how does that square with one another?
Thanks for this question, and hello from Paris. As you said, when I started the research, I was interested in Europe's boundaries, or its lack of boundaries, and this geopolitical turn in European affairs with the new Commission. Over the course of my research, I've added in an extra element, which is this subtitle, The Uneven Spaces of Living, Breathing, Moving, and Dying. And if I reflect on the election results yesterday in France, three things come to my mind which relate to this subtitle. The first is that the participation was historically low, much less in the second round than in the first round, which took place 3 months ago at the very beginning of the crisis and was already a historic low. Now, who didn't go and vote? I suspect, there's no figures on this yet, but I suspect it was people who are afraid of catching the virus. And we know that that affects some people more than others. And so there is an uneven participation. And our democratic systems, at least in France, haven't thought about how to deal with that uneven condition of access. So that's the first reflection. And I fear that the results that we've seen and this green wave is very much related to the fact that perhaps an older part of the population didn't go and vote. Second consideration is that the Green Party has a credibility on a couple of subjects which are directly related with the spaces that we live in and have become big themes these last months. Housing and people having access to decent housing, precarious work, and perhaps thirdly, the quality of the food that we eat and the circular economy around that. These are all themes that the Greens had a credibility on, particularly with the younger population, and relate all of them to space. And the third reflection is more to do with time and its relationship with space. I think the Green Party was able to make an argument about our past and certain traditional knowledges and traditional ways of, for example, farming or dealing with climatic risk like climate fire, and our future, and to translate lessons from the past into a project for the future. So they had a kind of reading of European time and space, which made them convincing this time around.
What I find fascinating with your project, Nicolo, is the fact that as you tackle boundaries and borders, we have seen eminently with the coronavirus that boundaries can be set within the narrowest of our spaces, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our cities. And I think the example of people being fearful of going out to vote is an incredible political boundary itself, let alone changing the boundaries of the classical party setups that we have had in European countries for the past decades since World War II. Where are you taking this theme as you develop it further, Nicolo?
Well, I think to underline what you said, the interest with this topic is that at once it is highly personal, and the corona crisis has brought that out. It's about each of us individually and the spaces and areas we feel like we can access or that we're allowed to access. But it's also global. It's our connection with people who may be very far away, but if they get ill very soon, our world could change as well. Or because of conditions in another country, maybe our geopolitical relationships change. So the European Union is discussing today which countries to allow people to fly to Europe from. China is potentially on the list of the allowed countries. The United States is not on the list of allowed countries. That's potentially a big change. So the interest is to make this relationship between our individual personal experience and the changing world around us. And that is where I think the European Union has always had a great difficulty explaining why it's relevant to individuals and why it affects their everyday lives. And this experience of the corona crisis in particular has made us all think about the way we individually are related to a whole. And it opens an opportunity for a kind of new narrative of the European Union to really show how it's anchored in our everyday experience and the changes in that. And that's why it's important.
Okay, finally, and very briefly, one sentence answer, Nicolo. We are Europe's Futures Fellowship. Where do you see, from your vantage point, the future of this continent?
Across the Mediterranean. And I think that the relationship more generally with Africa and with Europe's former colonies, as you underlined, is an absolutely essential relationship. And the European Union hasn't begun to think through all the historical, energy, and future-related aspects of that relationship.
I would fully agree with you on that. Thank you very much, Nicolo. And we'll go now to see two films with Nicolo and Alida and Nicolo.
mislim da možemo početi.
Podijelio, recimo, vrlo zanimljiv broj predanih aplikacija za vizu u Njemačkoj, u zemljama regije. Ali da Vračić Institute for Human Sciences Beč.
Super, odlično. So basically what happened a few days ago, I had a Zoom conference with some people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. UK ambassador was there, but also some activists and people actually that are dealing more or less in one way or the other with immigration as such. And it was interesting because for the first time I feel that there is this awareness, the level of awareness that we would need to actually make an action.
Also very much important to establish the connection number 2 that goes from the diaspora, from an individual living in USA to whom this individual.
So like a multiplying effect, your own networks, your own connections. And what would be the first step?
I think the first step would be absolutely mapping of diaspora.
I ono što nam je zanimljivo o toj jednoj cirkularnoj migraciji, hoće li nam se ljudi vraćati, dijeliti znanje, hoće otići po bijelom svijetu.
Znamo da postoji trend odlaska, znamo da taj trend odlaska se neće zaustaviti u skorije vrijeme. Ono što mi ne znamo i o čemu bi ja možda voljela da razgovaramo, i mislim da to možda i bitnije u ovom kontekstu, jeste šta sada? My idea is actually to set up and organize in any shape and form a high-level conference on immigration.
Smatram da će se promijeniti sveukupni osjećaj beznađa onda kada političari povezani sa kriminalom ili kriminalci koji se nalaze na političkim pozicijama budu adekvatno procesuirani.
Young people go abroad, they go to Germany, to Western Europe because they can apply for the job, and be equal with the rest of the applicants.
Last region that experiences this, I want to make it a somewhat more constructive and positive, actually.
I agree with you. There needs to be a way in which we can help focus the minds. Now, in a calm situation where you have a process of migration that's been going on for years is not a crisis. I mean, there's nothing dramatic happening, except it is very dramatic. It is dramatic, and there needs to be a way in which we can show how dramatic it is by bringing these people together.
Just one figure that really is quite striking. 80 million people in the European Union live outside of their homes.
I didn't know that.
Europe's political geography is famously uncertain and contested. The luxury and burden of being the only continent to have given itself its own name is that its borders are undefined, and European history as a whole, both internally and externally, can be narrated as an infamous series of actions claiming, rejecting, defending or dividing lands, routes, cultures, names and symbols, which all potentially can be associated with it. To tell such a history, we would certainly need at least 2 narrators, a European and a non-European, if only it were possible to identify a priori who is who. Riven through with this inescapable history, acting in Europe's name always risks taking sides, but also risks the apparent fragility of irresolvable internal contradictions, the presence of apostates, renegades and rebels in the ranks. Is there some way of thinking territory beyond these military metaphors? Just as the European institutions were beginning to address themselves to this transforming world, the corona crisis accelerated, exacerbated, and undermined some of its underlying trends. If it's still too early in the crisis to fully chart this new landscape, some key features can be seen. The virus itself, its extraordinary contagiousness and speed of transmission across the planet, and its direct attack on the interface between our bodies and our environment as we breathe, operates a profound transformation of our phenomenological experience of space. Quite aside from the physical distancing, isolation and masking that populations have temporarily endured, our representation of our space has come under exacerbated tension. On the one hand, the intensification of our international connections, aware as we are that a flare-up in one part of the world, amongst them over there, may quickly have its consequences for us, here. Our ceaseless comparisons about the intimate details of everyday life in other countries. How often are they allowed outside? With who? For how long do children go to school? On the other hand, our preoccupation with our personal spaces, keeping our hands clean, disinfected, our alertness to the smallest signs of possible illness, our intensified relations with our most intimate personal connections, and a prolonged meditation on our own mortality.
So linked to this theme of Nicolo, and of course it's given us the desire to go to Paris, and who knows when we'll be able to do that, but you know, we're all hopeful. And now a short little film about the way that I came from Belgrade to Vienna a few weeks ago.
Today is the 8th of June. We are traveling from Belgrade home to Vienna home, and it's been 3 months plus many days that we have been here.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, as again speaking. My name is Martin Austin, and I'd like to wake you aboard the Airbus A220 on our service to Vienna. We're just waiting for the last documents. I expect to start the engines within the next 5 to 10 minutes. Together with me in the cockpit, First Officer Gabriel Marti, he will be on the controls. I hope you feel comfortable on board. Wish you now a very pleasant flight.
We'll now meet and talk with our next fellow, Professor Bernd Marin, who's here from Vienna, our Viennese Austrian fellow, on an important topic. He has a huge experience, and the fact that he's dealt with one of the big European and not only European issues, how do we fend for those who are going out of work and into retirement, a huge complex of social questions. If I dare say, here on this panel of 4, there are 3 gray-headed gentlemen, and that means that we're talking about aging and the fact, how do societies like ours actually deal with this issue where we are of a certain age, to put it respectively, and yet we feel that we still have a lot of energy and feel younger than we actually are. I guess I can speak for the 3 of us, given how active we are.
The 4 of us.
The 4, no. Bernd, tell us a bit, from what angle are you approaching this big European issue of the future?
Well, when I listened to your exchange with Alida and Nicolo, what immediately came to my mind was the collateral effects of what we see to happen on, for instance, the health system. You mentioned this immigration of medical doctors. I recall that as I'm living in Italy part of the year, I have very close friends there, and they, of course, when called upon to volunteer in my age or so, were turned down because they are part of the risk population and shouldn't volunteer. And so, but at the same time, they called for retired people to come back and to help in the hospitals, old age homes, and so on and so on. Except that they meant the very young pre-retired people in their late 50s, early 60s, and not people at the later stage in their life. When we think of, say, that in Bergamo, in Brescia, or in Lombardy, 20% of the medical staff was actually infected, and 10% of those who were infected actually died. They really ran a tremendous risk, but the risk was also kind of to, instead of being able to heal and to help, they were risking their own lives and at the same time involuntarily killing the patients of old age homes and so on, because what happened was that people paid the old age homes €150 a day to keep people with asymptomatic or infections which have not been very dramatic to stay there, because it was so much cheaper, quote unquote, as maintaining them in the hospital would have costed many times the amount. So this, of course, made the medical personnel, instead of healers, killers, quote unquote, because they were super spreaders, massively infecting the patients who have been exposed. You see this links to, for instance, the migration issue. And of course, there's this whole debate about, where actually, how did the virus come from Wuhan to Italy, and from Italy to Austria, and from Austria to the rest of Europe. This is an absolutely crucial topic, the migration and circular
To put it a
migration.
bit dramatically to you, Bernd, are we an aging and disappearing continent, or is there hope that this aging continent can actually fend for itself? And is then migration needed from other places?
Of course, migration is needed because it is a collective rejuvenation. It produces the miracle that while at the same time each of us is living ever longer, so longevity is increasing between 179 and 101 days a year in Austria, up to 167 days a year in Turkey. This is while living, we are gaining so much additional lifetime during our lives. So this, of course, is fantastic. Immigration from third countries helps to rejuvenate this continent collectively. So if there are, in the near future, for instance, 100 million instead of just a generation ago, 20 million Turkish people, this, of course, helps to rejuvenate the continent from a social and demographic point of view. And yeah.
So do you think those who are opposing immigration from a variety of member states, I think we all know who they are and no need to mention them, are they wrong in trying to push back or looking for immigration from other parts of the world?
Well, there are alternatives. The alternative would be to work endlessly. And that's the same people who, on a populist waves refuse to extend the active working life. While, over the last 1 or 2 generations, we gained more than a decade in additional lifetime. At the same time, we have been not extending or partly adjusting, our working lifetime, but actually reduced it significantly. So this, obviously cannot work out anywhere. And this is some of the serious impacts.
And the country where we are, Vienna, is it true that Vienna has more people born from outside of this country than, for example, New York? I mean, the percentage...
There's a well, it depends on how you count it, whether people are born abroad
but what I'm
or
saying,
naturalized,
this seems to be a welcoming country.
The citizenship, yes, we are. In the interwar period, Austrians were going to Czechoslovakia, to Romania, to many Central and Eastern Europe and Southeastern European countries to get a job, to get an income. Nowadays it's the other way around. It's always the richer countries who attracts the less rich countries. And this is a completely normal phenomenon from the 19th to the 21st century. Fine. Should we deprive ourselves of this rejuvenation source through immigration, for instance, we would be foolish and self-destructive.
That's a very strong message. Thank you, Bernd. And now we'll see a film about Bernd and his work.
Hi. I started doing a bit more comedy during Corona times than usual. Thus, not having bought a Harley-Davidson in Varoufakis' age already in my 50s might actually have significantly increased my survival chances so far, because driving fast is the #1 killer for men. A new girlfriend and lover in times of quarantine is difficult and not recommendable, as lawyers still quarrel whether sex outside your home was actually illegal during quarantine. This applies in particular if your loved ones are already more than one, as suits my age. It was pretty difficult at first. I was at a pretty serious disadvantage because I was not funny. I was not funny, but the corona crisis itself, the everyday consequences it generated were just mind-blowing. Funny indeed. All of a sudden, a chronic, notorious couch potato on his sofa, drinking beer and watching the TV goggle box, has become a life savior. We hardly recognize the world any longer. We see socializing of benefits, whatever it costs. Sauvetage à tout prix. Solidarität koste es, was es wolle. I was telling you before about this Europe's Futures Fellowship. Every time I was turning up for a meeting, I was the oldest person on the bill among the scholars and fellows. I wish they were here, sitting just opposite of me, so I could tell them this. Nicole, Péter, Alida, Leszek, Isabelle, and Nicolo. It's great, but at the same time, it also often sucks to be young. But it gets better automatically with old age. I call this age inflation. People feel up to the age of 41.8, they feel young. Then we look at the median age, and this is 40.9, which by implication means that the majority of the old continents feels young. Most people have a very good sense of their true biological age. And so many people in their early 50s feel like in their late 30s, not just women. And let me tell you one gender-sensitive thing. Men are dying of corona much more than women. In neighboring Italy, for instance, it is 71% us men. And statistics? Well, the statistics is generous to the male survivors. By implication, the marriage market, if we ever needed it because we remarry as rare birds, only 5% widowers survive their spouses, gets ever more attractive for the ever fewer surviving men. Up to, at a certain age, 1 man to 12 women in our late 80s upwards. And this mind-boggling proportion is looking even sweeter when you know that many of these women are probably feeling 20 years younger than they and you actually are. And actually, when you ask people about how much younger they feel, in all this very sophisticated analysis, in the end, people are asked, how healthy or unhealthy you feel you are on a scale 1 to 10 or whatever, and this is by far the best predictor. So you just ask the patient instead of the doctor. You know?
Bernd, thank you very much. I know that it took a lot of effort. Thank you for your courage in doing this, because you put an extremely difficult and complex topic very close to us to understand, what Europe is facing in terms of the generations that are living side by side and now actually challenged by this tremendous and dramatic coronavirus. But we now turn to Grigorij Mesežnikov, our colleague who made the bus trip, as you saw, from Bratislava this morning, and who is working on a topic about the resurgence of the far right in his home country, Slovakia, which, as you know, is part of what we call the Visegrad 4 countries, where Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic are also included. Grigorij, you are an analyst and an academic researcher who's looked at these topics for many years. What would you say distinguishes Slovakia from the others in this group, or makes it very similar to the others with regard to the topic that you're studying?
What I wanted to show in my research activities in this fellowship was to connect two trends and analyze the consequences. So the first trend is illiberal regression of democracy, which is not typical only for Slovakia. Now we see that in some Central European countries, but also in Western European countries, we are witnessing some trends very unhealthy for democracy, concentration of power, state capture, some other non-democratic steps. And the second trend is rising the populist right-wing parties of forces. In Slovakia, And I think that it's the main distinction. The result of a liberal regression of democracy during the last, I would say, maybe 12 years, is that the main beneficiary from this is just extreme right fascist force. So, and you know that there are some very credible surveys which is measuring the quality of democracy in transforming countries. Nations in Transit is one of them. And we see how the rise of extreme right forces is correlating with the regression of democracy. So in Slovakia, 2 times the party which is in parliament succeeded to be elected to parliament after the rule of national populist parties, which really during their governance were causing the worsening of democracy, the worsening of quality of democracy. So what happened in Slovakia is that while mainstream political forces, mainstream politicians, either soft populist, national populist, or mainstream democratic parties, when they were competing to each other, somehow they forgot that the main danger for both of these camps is not just the losing of power of one of these camps, but the danger which is created by a fascist party, which is rising just in these conditions.
This is absolutely one of the key topics that we're looking at here during the Europe's Futures Fellowship last year and this year. And I'm just reminded that just the other day, German Chancellor Angela Merkel in the Bundestag also talked about the danger if the democratic political forces are not really taking care of the possible danger. And we have seen, and this is why I find your topic, Grigorij, so important, because it falls within the bigger framework of developments that we're seeing called the regression of democracy or the backsliding, where some of us have been unaware of the potential that the far right has to find that wedge in the public opinions with rising inequality, with the 1%,
Yeah, I think that Slovakia's case is just a warning for the whole Europe. Because in Slovakia, this party is not represented only in the national parliament, but this party represents the whole stream, extreme right, really fascist stream in European Parliament. I mean, this party delegated 2 MEPs to European Parliament. No any other party from European Union member states is represented in national parliament. So it means that for all other countries it's just a warning that mainstream parties should care not only about their position in the power, not only about their competition, but about the circumstances which unfortunately are allowing to rise for right-wing extremists.
Thank you, Grigorij. I think this case study that you have presented us forms an extremely important part of what is, as we said, a bigger topic, and that we will definitely continue to research and study and see the linking elements from different countries. What is the commonality, but also what are the specific national aspects of it. And now we will see a film where Grigorij appears as the main actor.
Grigorij! Grigorij!
I'm here.
Oh! Hi!
Igor, Dino! Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Yeah, please.
Very nice.
What can I offer you? Tea or coffee or?
Coffee, please.
I'll put this to have like a visual link to Corona times.
My mask is here. Look, it's a gift of my daughter. I use this.
Can you put it for me?
Rolling Stones mask.
What should we do the interview about?
It's about right-wing extremism and about how the general circumstances, the democratic society, liberal democratic regime, we are members of European Union, and in such favorable conditions for democracy, somehow suddenly, not suddenly for me, but for many people, suddenly we found out that there are people who are against democracy And it's not only that they're against democracy and they somehow have to force themselves to live with democracy. No, I think that they have plans with democracy, how to first worsen democracy and at the end to remove democracy.
Is IWM experience the fellowship, even if it's truncated because of this corona, is representing something special? Is it special because of corona?
Already in October I started to feel this kind of missing something. And during the quarantine, during this corona crisis, all events which Institute prepared, they were suspended. My last trip to other countries was participation in the conference in North Macedonia. So I returned from Skopje through Vienna to Bratislava March 10th. I have received maybe a week later a mail from one of the organizers, and she asked me to report my state of health.
Sorry, he was mentioning Skopje.
Yes.
Isn't that thing that you went also with Bernd Marin?
Yes, yes.
And with Ivan Vejvoda?
Yes, yes. Because
and it's exactly after that what happened.
Yes, yes.
Ivan got ill.
Ivan, really? Wow, I didn't know this.
He got corona.
Well, but was he infected by this corona?
He was in hospital for a month. It was he had COVID, but again, the working presumption is not that that he was ill in Skopje, because no one else.
Only Ivan.
So all things considered, he was lucky. I mean,
So you're a driver, or Dino, you're a driver.
We came with his car, yes.
You can drink. Maybe we can start to drink now here, because I have here wine. Can we? Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We have French.
Oh.
Can be?
Very fancy.
Just.
Okay, well, I think we're all cherishing a glass of wine, but we'll leave that for later or when we meet. So we are back to Zoom now, and to our fellows who are virtually with us from the other wonderful places in Europe. And what we will first do is see a film with our fellow Péter Krekó, whom I'll introduce after the film.
About a year ago, a secretly recorded videotape was being published in Austria that led to a political scandal called Ibizagate. Despite the scandal broke out only 1 week before the European parliamentary election, they lost less than 1/4 of their supporters, gained 17% on the elections. They could delegate 3 members to the European Parliament, including Heinz Christian Strache, who was the main player in this video. Last summer, an audio tape was published on which Gianluca Savoini met with 3 Russian businessmen. On this meeting, they discussed how the far-right Lega party could be illegally financed through corrupt energy deals, and the popularity of the Lega party did not decrease at all as a result of this story. Russian money played some role in the Brexit campaign as well. It did not lead to the disappearance of Nigel Farage from the British political scene, just the very opposite. On the 2019 European parliamentary elections, Brexit party, his party, came first. Why voters does not care about sometimes illegal, sometimes just amoral interference of malign superpowers into their elections? The response is political tribalism, an understanding of politics as a war between the evil and the good, so-called populists, I would call them tribalists, are leading governments in Hungary and in Poland. What we found in a study with Political Capital Institute we did in Hungary and Poland is that while tribalist voters are not the majority in these societies, but rather the loud minority. They are overrepresented in the party basis of the governmental parties in Fidesz in Hungary and in Law and Justice in Poland. 59% of tribalist voters in Hungary are voting for Fidesz. Tribalist leaders want us not to communicate with people who have a different opinion. They just want to label them. What we can do on our own is to fight against tribalism in investing more in our personal relationships, engage into conversations in which we try to go beyond party lines and try to go beyond identity categories. Personal connections that go beyond identity lines can destroy the malevolent effects of tribalism.
Péter, welcome once again to our session here at the library at the Institute for Human Sciences. As you saw, Péter Krekó is a fellow with us from Budapest, Hungary, and he's been working on a theme that is very similar and interconnected with the one that we heard previously with Grigorij Mesežnikov, certain differences in nomenclature about the phenomenon. Péter, you encompassed everything from the US to the east and backwards, including Italy with Matteo Salvini. How would you describe today's situation? Are you seeing a strengthening of this phenomenon, or with the various things that have happened in the past year or so, have you seen a pushback against this? Clearly, a lot depends on what we colloquially call fake news, misinformation. But I would also like to ask you a question. How much do you see the socio-economic, the fact that people experience greater inequality, feeding into the phenomenon you're describing?
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Ivan, and thank you for being able to make it able that I present my topic, and I'm unfortunately the only one without a sexy background, but that's how it is. So I unfortunately doesn't have a good computer enough.
You are the exception that confirms the rule.
Background. And so let me start with a personal story. It happened to me in 2016, and I think it brings us closer to what happens in the United States these days. So it happened to me that just right after the presidential elections in 2016, a friend of mine at Rutgers University invited me, and I went to New Jersey to meet him. And when the taxi driver picked me up on the airport, we started discussing, and it turned out that even if he was an immigrant from Portugal, a guy of around, let's say, 60 years old, he was a Trump voter. And we had a quite nice discussion, and I think I understood a lot about his motivations. And I told this story to my professor friend at Rutgers, and he told me that, come on, you should have asked for another taxi. Sorry for this uncomfortable experience. And I just wanted to tell him the very opposite, that it was nice to talk to this guy. And if we take a look at what is happening in the United States these days around the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think the extremes around numerical politics and history politics and remembrance politics, then I think we can easily conclude that this is the result of people of different opinions simply do not communicating to each other. And I would say this is already a success of tribalist politicians, because tribalist politicians want us to listen to them as our primary source of information and do not engage too much in horizontal connections. So I do think that tribalism is on the rise, not only in the Anglo-Saxon world, not only in Central Eastern Europe, but in the whole Western world. And the stakes are pretty high because tribalism can eat up democracy. Tribalism can destroy the very fundamentals of our liberal systems.
And just linking back to Grigorij again, Hungary and Poland are clearly in one sort of batch of countries. Do you see a difference with what is happening in Slovakia and the Czech Republic when we talk about Visegrad 4 from where you are sitting?
Definitely. I think we can see governments in Poland and Hungary that totally gave up the mainstream norms of liberal democracies, that trying to create some kind of common ground in the democratic norms and trying to create some kind of common platforms. And yes, as I told, it's not only regional specific, but it's even more dangerous, I think, in Central Eastern Europe. And one very important difference between the electoral systems, I think, greatly contributed to this difference. So in Slovakia and Czech Republic, we have mainly representative electoral systems, while the majority principle is stronger in Poland and Hungary. And it created governments that could totally override the democratic norms and democratic institutions, and it makes a huge difference. So coalition governments, even if they are sometimes inefficient, even if they are sometimes losing popularity and collapsing, I think creating benevolent dynamics into new democracies, and the new democracies where this dynamic is stopped because it's stopped from above, then I think the dangers of the destruction of democracy are becoming much stronger.
Péter, thank you very much for making that very important point that, among others, I also stress that the difference in electoral systems between majoritarian and proportional really gives outcomes that are sometimes welcome, sometimes completely unwelcome, and that sort of the median line of a mixed system is maybe a sort of compromise, but lots to discuss there. Anyway, thank you for your incisive work on these issues, and not only on your country, but taking a broader framework. And we move now from Budapest to Lodz, I think, where we find Leszek Jażdżewski, our colleague from Poland. We remain within the Visegrad 4 group because we had Slovakia, Hungary, and now Poland. Leszek, let me begin with the immediate political events in Poland. Last night, yesterday, not last year, you were holding the first round of presidential elections that were very contested and very exciting, with the last-minute candidate of the opposition making a huge effect. And we're looking to a second round that will be in 2 weeks' time. Opinion polls that came out show a tight race. Why don't we start with how you see within this Visegrad 4, a bit like we said with Grigorij and Péter, how you see the situation in your country regarding these questions of tribalism or the far right or populism.
Right, thanks a lot, Ivan, and it's been a great pleasure to be with you today, even though we are separated by, well, connected and separated by technology at the same time. And congratulations on making this happen, this meeting at the library, which reminds me of so much time I spent over there with the books that's inspired me. And yes, it's been really the end of the 2 year basically election years in Poland. So we are going to have the second round in 2 weeks. To give you a broader picture, it seems to me that unfortunately, even now, it seems that the populist nationalists are much better in understanding the ways in which the politics of today really works. So they've been efficient to mobilize people around issues that seem central to them, and national identity among those, and also social issues. And at the same time, I feel that for the first time we see some hope So there is the way to inspire also for the opposition candidate. It's been for the first time in the last 5 years. There's been so much enthusiasm for his candidature, even though it was, as you Ivan rightly said, it's been a blitzkrieg. It's been just 2 months. However, I'm a cautious pessimist, so I'm afraid that even in the midterm, in the long term, I believe that we are much better suited than Hungary to regain our liberal democracy, because it's not really liberal democracy at the time. In the short term, I'm afraid that still the populist candidate, current president, would win. But this is not inevitable in the longer term.
I take you now more specifically to your project within the Europe's Futures Fellowship, and say that some of us know that you run and organize this event in your hometown of Lodz called not Hunger Games, but Liberty Games. How do the two mesh in your life and your intellectual analytic work?
Well, that's interesting personal feeling. You know, it's I actually had this event at the time of my fellowship here, and in Vienna, and I think this juggling different balls, you know, between trying to make an influence on the real life and at the same time trying to go deeply into the ideas. This is well, you can say complementary in a way of the nature of what I do. One of the reasons I was so happy to be at IWM is that I didn't feel that this is a purely intellectual endeavor. Of course, it was crucial, and I'm actually lucky to have time to go into those books that usually I just buy, you know, and now you didn't have to buy them; they were all standing around you, in the room. Because I believe that the politics that doesn't really go deep enough, you know, that doesn't really grasp the nature of things. Like, I'm afraid that we are going on some kind of autopilot mode for a time. I don't say we all. I can say us liberals or mainstream in Poland, or to some extent maybe Central Eastern Europe. And I think we should understand that really the nature of time and things changes. The nature of politics changes. That you know, we don't realize that we are living in different times, such as you know, linear narrative that we believed was true for a long time, from the end of the history, from the fall of Berlin Wall. And it seems that we now moving into more circular time, where history comes back, returns to us, and faces us with some great challenges. And so we should go deep enough to understand what we're looking at. And on the other hand, we should not just lay still and discuss on the comfortable couch. We should do something about it. So I hope I could carry on like this, and I hope that will be more Viennas to go deep to understand where we are.
Thank you very much, Leszek. We will certainly convene our fellows at the first possible opportunity. We don't know when that is. Bring the fellows of last year, the fellows of the coming year. And let me just say that we were supposed to have physical events in all of these cities, in Lodz, in Berlin, in Paris, and in Sarajevo, but unfortunately we couldn't. But we were fortunate enough to do events in Bratislava, in Palermo, and in Brussels with some of our fellows. So we were sort of cut in half as respect to our initial project. Now we will see a film with Leszek starring in it.
The man in Krzysztof Kieślowski przypadek was chasing a train at this very place, and Whether he made it or not, it really influenced his whole future. Central Eastern Europe also embarked on some kind of journey 30 years ago, and our journey begins here. So, better hurry up. All right, made it. And here we are, Central Warsaw Station. Well, you can't really miss it. This is the gift from Joseph Stalin to the Poles. Best living example of what Andrzej Ledes described as sleepwalking through the revolution.
The end of the West, as a real or perceived phenomenon, is one of the reasons for the recent populist success across the world.
So I'm on my way to the first presidential debate. We are facing the end of the big idea that was able to contain, up to the point, radical ideologies from winning in Europe and pacify internal divisions between and within the states.
The structure of capitalism and liberal democracy were the default model. Almost as in some magical way, the previous 45 years of history didn't happen.
This is this kind of commitment that the good reporting really needs, right?
The inevitability of the final destination, which was epitomized as the end of the history by the Francis Fukuyama, made the transition of the former communist states, but also neutral countries looking for the future models of development, a one-way path.
You need to speak to the marketing, that's what they asked me. But I have a permission to film as well. The imitation, as described by Krastev and Holmes, required imitators to look upon the West
and simultaneously to reject their own way of development. Any third way, as dangerous utopia, such as Tito's Yugoslavia, were considered legitimate.
Pouczenie. Dziękuję. Musi mnie pan pouczyć. Recording in front of the US Embassy could cause some trouble. Unparalleled hegemony of US, compared by many, Robert Kagan among them, to the Roman Empire.
Comprised not only by the military power, but mainly by the seemingly unmatched political model. The collapse of the communism as an idea and as political entity caught the West unaware. It wasn't managed, it just happened.
It is perfectly possible to reinvent national emotions, feelings, patriotism and so on. The flag for the sake of the European project. This is the Smolensk crash monument here at the Piłsudski Square. We go high, but we don't really know why.
This was the real end of the history. I believe that history didn't really matter.
So the biggest controversy of this museum is that actually it commemorates something that was a complete failure, just another disaster for Polish troops.
It is possible to inspire the national sentiments for the sake of the European destiny.
Marginalizing those for whom the patriotism is just another word for xenophobia and racial hatred. Leading us to the off-Piotrkowska. Off-Piotrkowska not really off anymore. It started as kind of place for artists.
New narratives, reinvigorating self-doubting European project and Western values are more needed than ever. New generation of young Europeans are entering the stage.
Please help me love you, Poland. I can't stand love to you anymore, Poland. I can't stand with you any longer, Poland. I'm leaving.
Oh yeah.
I think there is only that much to say, that the history would never abandon us in a way, and that we are always bound to be confronted with, in a way, reinventing it, because this is what we are telling to ourselves. As James Baldwin said in 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King, all that can save you now is the confrontation with your own history, which is not your past, but your present.
Thank you to Leszek also for his film, for his messages, and the reminder that we need to remember each time that we need to be confronting our past, however present our daily life is. And there were some wonderful street scenes from today's Warsaw as Leszek traveled. but we see that the worst of the past, the evil can return. That is something that I unfortunately had to learn, as did Alida, who was younger then, that your country can disappear in front of you, and it can also happen in the most violent of ways possible. And European history, if no other, is there to remind us that these things are possible even in what we call democratic and civilized countries with great culture. So thank you, Leszek. And we will now go to a evolution movie to see how things have evolved. And we are back to our Zoom room with all our fellows here in the library and over there across the screens. And we go to Isabelle Ioannides, who is in Brussels and doing a variety of most interesting things. She is from Cyprus, at the far southeast end of the European Union and the European continent, living a very interesting professional life, teaching at the university and doing research at the European Parliament. Isabelle is focused on a topic that we see as one of our three key topics, and that's the question of the enlargement of the European Union to the Western Balkans, that has had a rocky ride since the famous Thessaloniki summit in 2003 in Greece, when the promise was made that these countries would join once they met all the criteria. Hi, Isabelle, and give us a sense and flavor of where you see things now in terms of the challenges that lie ahead of bringing in what I call this last part of core geographic Europe into the Union.
Hi, Ivan. Hi, everyone. So lovely to see you all. Well, I think listening to Leszek and Péter and Grigorij, I can say that things are difficult for the Balkans also because things are difficult for us inside the EU. So I'm quite obsessed with the idea of selling an EU that really upholds its values as we have promised the region and as we promise in our foreign policy. And when our credibility inside is questioned so much, it's difficult to make such a project believable outside. And I think that the coronavirus, this crisis that we're all living, can be as much a challenge as an opportunity. The challenge, I guess, will be that we're now trying to negotiate a budget, and EU enlargement is clearly something that will cost a lot of money if we want to do it properly, if we want to make the necessary reforms to make this project effective. But also because there are so many challenges internally today, I am worried that this project will again find itself on the back burner. But on a more positive point of view, I think that we can learn a lot also from this crisis that is very transferable. And if we can see that we're so close in the end with China, then how much closer are we to the Western Balkans, really, which are just a stone throw away. I think that we have a different sense of globalization today and of space than we had before this coronavirus. And actually, the interconnectedness is so much closer. I think the way that the EU has reacted, even though it reacted too slowly as it usually does, has shown that to the region. I hope it has been seen, because sitting in my apartment, it's obviously not that clear to get a sense of what actually happens in the region, that the Western Balkans has been treated as a privileged partner. It has been given access to instruments that were in the past just used for the EU member states. So I hope that shows already that there is an openness and a willingness to bring them in. And then another important lesson, I would say, is that we've seen the power of what can happen at a local level, a sort of devolution of powers, so that at the communal level and at the level of local authorities, a lot can happen if we organize ourselves. And this is a lesson that the EU could learn and change the way it engages with the region, insofar as, of course, doing government-to-government relations, of course, working with civil society, but going beyond that, empowering more local authorities, something that exists in its instruments but hasn't been used very much. If we even look at the evaluation of the EPA 2 and 3, we see that local authorities have not been engaged enough, or not given that much funding and opportunity, neither to engage in projects, neither to work with their natural partners, which are civil society. But also what we can see, because of this different conceptualization of globalization, is that actually the challenges that we face inside our societies are also the same in the societies of these countries that we're dealing with. And there could be a lot more of peer-to-peer exchange on issues of inequality, of digitalization, of economic development, of the Green Deal, for example. So yeah, these are opportunities that the EU would be good at taking advantage of and should take advantage of.
Absolutely, Isabelle, and thank you for mentioning both the far-reaching and other ways in which these candidate countries and aspiring countries could be more part of what goes on in the European Union. I'd like to now bring in a friend, a colleague, and our partner from the Erste Stiftung, Hedwig Morvai, who is here with us. She is our point of contact at the Erste Foundation, and also someone who is, dare I say, a veteran of the fight to bring these countries into the European Union, because she led for more than 10 years the European Fund for the Balkans. Hedwig, do come into this discussion with a comment or a question to Isabelle, please, given your long-standing experience.
Thank you, Ivan. I'm so glad to be present here today and participating in this great experiment. I'm very much enjoying it. And hi, Isabelle. I'm happy to meet you, at least in this way. And I dare to say that the accession process of the Western Balkans was in a pretty messy situation before this crisis, and for many years, and we were criticizing the business as usual approach, and that no real changes are actually happening on the ground on one hand, on the other hand, that there is no real intention, it seems, from the from the EU side to really make the accession of the region happen in the near future. So I wonder, what could be the next step after the crisis, the first step which would really show a kind of a re-energizing momentum for taking up with the real accession process, and where and how it could be designed. So what could be that kind of triggering element what could give a new kind of energy and a new way of dealing with the accession process of the Balkans. Of course, dealing with the real reform processes in the Balkans, which would then lead to accession to the EU at one point. And I would not go into the discussion now about how the EU will look like and what the future of the EU is and how enlargement in general should look like, because that would broaden our discussion very much. Of course, you mentioned that the Balkans was already during the crisis included in some of the EU policies. Hopefully it will be also included in the post-COVID recovery strategies. But what would be that one kind of momentum and step what would re-energize the accession process itself?
Thank you, Hedvig. Isabelle.
It's difficult to just talk about one, because I feel it's the entire approach that needs to change towards the Balkans. I think a process had started before the pandemic. I was extremely skeptical when this new EU enlargement methodology came out, because I felt it would politicize the process so much that we would lose the approximation, the actual reform assessment that needs to happen in these countries. But listening to experts, and also experts actually who live in the country, and also seeing politically what's happening in Brussels, it seems that there is such a push to use this methodology, in that it would help bring legitimacy, political legitimacy into the process. And I think this is something that has been lacking in the process, in that EU enlargement has been carried out very much as a technocratic exercise of legal approximations, and every time there was a blockage, it was mostly because member states would block something at some stage. And perhaps with this new methodology, because you're bringing in the member states and you need this political legitimacy, it gives some transparency to the politics behind the process. I don't think you ever get rid of the politics of the process. And indeed, I think we are at such a stage of the development of the countries themselves that the EU only has control of part of the process. A lot will also depend on what the countries themselves do. And obviously some of them seem more likely to want to do the necessary reforms for things to move forward, while others not so much. And it's extremely difficult to take the political component outside of the equation. But issues of reconciliation, of statehood, will remain issues that are political, and that's where they will need to be dealt with. And I think it will be a matter of political responsibility and accountability from both sides.
Thank you.
It won't be a one-way process.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. Those of us who live in these countries and have been following this know that there is no simple way to do it. But the main thing that I would add is that the homework of democratizing our societies remains within the societies, but the little help from our friends, from Brussels and from member states is crucial to the success of this process. So thank you, and now we'll see a film with Isabelle.
So basically I look at the nature of the EU. The global strategy expresses a shift from an EU principled approach to what they call principled pragmatism, where essentially there would be a more realistic strategic assessment of the environment rather than this idealistic notion of building a better world. If we look specifically at the Western Balkan project, we see that conditionality has not really worked in this region, when it was the promise for moving things forward, for reforms being made in the region.
Hey Zoran, how are things? How are things in Skopje?
Well, I don't know. They finally decided now to have elections. We'll see how that will go.
So experts, when they talk about the EU enlargement process, they often refer to a fatigued process. The integration process has been, first of all, it has been put on the back burner on many occasions. Not enough has happened since we gave the European perspective to the region back in 2003. I think we almost deal with these countries as not that much has happened to them, not much has evolved. But that's untrue. Places do change, and they sometimes change very quickly. Actually, this kind of reminds me of my own personal experience in Cyprus. And most characteristically, I remember coming back from kindergarten and in the afternoon playing with the goats that a shepherd would bring into the field next to my house. And I was living really in the middle of Nicosia, in a rather modern part of the city. And these are memories that my sister, who's only 4 years younger than me, doesn't have. And that shows how quickly things can change in a country. I think if we look at Central Europe and the challenges that some of the countries there are facing with keeping democratic institutions and rule of law, we realize that actually enlargement is not an end in itself. It's really a constant process. It's a process to get into the EU, but then you really need to keep the political motivation to remain faithful to those values and to the democratic institutions and to rule of law and protection of human rights. And that's why approximation of laws isn't enough, and you need to change the mentalities. That approximation of law can be reversible, but if you buy into the hearts and minds of the people, then the process is not so reversible. And I think only like that will enlargement really work.
Okay, and last but not least, we go to our fellow in Berlin, Nicole Koenig, who is the Deputy Director of the Jacques Delors Institute in Berlin and also now part of the Hertie School of Governance. Nicole, welcome. And we will go to see your film first, and then we will have our conversation.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
I'm Josh, for the interview for IWM.
Are you filming already, or?
Yeah, I was filming the building a little bit.
You do what you need to do.
Okay.
I just have to attend this this online meeting.
Giving a conference.
It's a video conference of the defense ministers, and they are discussing the EU's security and defense agenda. And I've been working on that, and hopefully they will make an important decision today. But I can't really connect at the moment.
With defense and security, this area, no? Mm-hmm. So what's going on with it?
Well, actually, quite a lot has been going on in this area. It's interesting because one of the fields where actually in EU integration where most has happened, or a lot of reforms have happened since 2016. So we had the Ukraine conflict, there was this feeling that war is back on the European continent. Then there was the Syrian conflict, and then there was this feeling, is Donald Trump going to withdraw the US from NATO? Should we maybe take care of our own security? And this now it's like the moment where you look back at what has happened and what should happen next.
It sounds like European army, no?
Yeah, I really don't like that term. It's more about really deeper defense cooperation, deeper security cooperation between the member states. So it's like joint missions, for example, in the EU neighborhood.
Well, but still, it sounds very unpopular. Huh?
You probably have followed it. I mean, this Europe that protects. I mean, this was a phrase, right?
Yeah.
And I think this was a feeling you had in the elections, like citizens want a Europe that protects.
Well, then, in terms of...
I think...
Is it starting?
Yeah, I think it's starting.
Maybe we could do the interview somewhere else. Let me just find a nice place. So, when you're finished, just give me a call, okay?
Yeah, see you in a bit.
See you in a bit, yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Coffee. Great.
Yes.
It was good, but actually he didn't say so much. I mean, I think, it's important to understand that this is the first time that the member states really want to agree on such a common threat analysis. They agreed on the so-called strategic compass process. So it's a 2-year process. That's what they decided to launch, but they didn't say so much about the content yet. And I think there is a reason why there is not such a member state document. If you go to Portugal, they might be much more worried about conflicts from the southern neighborhood. If you look at Poland or the Baltic states, of course, they are much more worried about Russia. So I think what this process is really about at the start is that we try to understand each other's nightmares. If we think we're now in Berlin and one of the things that's going on right now is the decision that the Americans will withdraw troops from Germany, and it's again another push that Europeans really have to understand that they have to take care of their own security. And security is a very broad term. I think what the pandemic showed us now is we had a crisis coming. We didn't know, we didn't expect it. And what it tells us, maybe we are now expecting a second wave of this pandemic, but maybe the next crisis will be entirely different. So I think it's very important for Europeans to actually think about what's ahead and to also prepare for it. And this is what this process could do if it's done well.
Hello, Nicole, once again. That was a terrific movie and summary of your work. You are dealing with really one of the burning issues of how Europe is to be more strategic, and in the words of the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, to be a geopolitical commission, understanding that the world of 2 big powers, the US and China, are in certain ways challenging the place that Europe wants to carve out for itself, or that has had in all sorts of ways: security, economic, cultural, and others. We know that today, I think, Presidents Macron and Chancellor Merkel are meeting, so again, very topical as we speak in real time. We know that the European Recovery Fund has been heralded as really an important step forward. We're not out of the woods because there are the so-called frugal 4 countries that still have qualms about this. Austria, where we are sitting, has been one of these countries that has been pushing back. How do you think that, given your subject, Nicole, how are we Europeans and European member states living up to this desire to be more geopolitical, and understanding that, as you said also in your words, to be more strategic about what awaits us around the corner?
Well, I mean, the type of my project has changed to the future of EU foreign and security policy in a turbulent time. And I think if I look back at the past year, it really is true. I mean, we've heard from Nicolo about the geopolitical turn. You have mentioned it, Ivan, this promise that, you know, the EU should be more geopolitical, learn to speak the language of power. So we had this promise, and I remember starting in September in the library that you're sitting in and saying that the EU is likely to run into a gap between capabilities and expectations, especially given this promise of being more geopolitical. And I think what we have seen now with the pandemic in the past months is that actually the factors that have led to this geopolitical positioning of the EU have been amplified. So if you look at the great power competition, you mentioned the US and China, we have seen a rise of this further intensification of this great power competition, what Josep Borrell has called a global war of narratives, each side blaming each other for being at the origins of this pandemic. Then we have also seen at the same time a crisis of multilateralism. You know, we had the withdrawal of the United States from the World Health Organization, and also other moves that we have seen in the aftermath, for example, the sanctions towards the International Criminal Court. And going hand in hand with this, we have seen even more intense tensions in the transatlantic relations. And one of the things happening today, aside from Meseberg, is actually the Pentagon proposing how the US could withdraw these 9,500 troops from Germany. So we have seen, and at the same time, of course, we have seen that this pandemic has an effect on our neighborhood. It's of course leading to further destabilization. So what we have is actually also a very strong expectation that Europe can now step up to this challenge and, you know, lead on global solidarity, perhaps propose compromises in this great power competition. So we have very high expectations also to preserve the multilateral system, but at the same time, of course, we have less soft power and hard power resources. Because if you think about you know, the multi-annual financial framework, so the budgetary discussions, but also national spending on development and defense. I mean, if you think about the economic implications of this crisis, there is actually a danger that Europe turns inward as a consequence of this pandemic. So how is the EU living up? I think it's still too early to tell. I think much will also depend on this internal response. So, you know, will the EU really be able to agree on internal solidarity so it can provide external solidarity?
One issue that I'd like to bring as a final question is clearly Brexit has diminished Europe in some way, although the UK, for all intents and purposes, will stay a close partner in defense issues. Can I, if I dare say, put you on the spot? I mean, clearly we're all looking to Germany. The strongest economy, not only Germany, but the Franco-German relationship, and that's why this meeting today is important. Can you tell me, do you sense that there's a rising awareness in Germany of needing to sort of take the lead, as is always repeated by the Chancellor and others, within a clear European framework? Or is it just rhetoric and not really picking up the action behind the rhetoric?
Well, I think yes. I mean, I think you've mentioned the meeting in Meseberg, so I think this is already a clear sign with the Franco-German proposal that also influenced a lot the Commission proposal, and this was a quite radical change of the German position, let's say, internally. At the same time, I think, Brexit also means that Germany has to step up and provide more leadership on EU foreign and security policy. And that's why this initiative that I mentioned in the video, the Strategic Compass, is an initiative that was prepared by the German presidency in the past 1.5 years. And, you know, it sounds a little bit boring, maybe a bit technical, but what it really is supposed to do is to tackle some of the key weaknesses of the EU's security and defense policy. So we should agree to a common threat analysis. We should then agree to common reactions to these threats. So to actually agree on common instruments. And Germany has been pushing quite a lot also on keeping up the collective resources for European defense provided through the EU budget. So I think there's a willingness to play a leading role, but still, I mean, again, you know, what we see very much now is this feeling that Germany wants to build bridges, and I think this we will see whether it will succeed in that in the end. And of course, one of the questions regarding security and defense policy always in Germany is what happens if there is a big crisis in the future, and that, you know, there should be German leadership regarding this very sensitive question of security and defense. Will we actually see this leadership in the European framework? So this is still an open question. But I think there's a very strong awareness that you have to compensate for perhaps the political leadership gap that the UK leaves.
Well, I'll take those words as reassuring from you. We come to the end of our fellows' presentations. I'd like to say a few words of conclusion, and it's basically to repeat what the fellows know, but what the intention of this fellowship is. And again, thanks to the Erste Stiftung, our partner who believes in this project and with us, and it's wonderful to know that Hedwig Morvai is here with us on that account. The fellows are at the intersection of academia and the policy world. They have all extended networks, not only in their own countries, but Europe-wide, and I would add worldwide. Thus, the impact that we're looking for from them individually, but also as a group, is extremely important. And I think that what you can gather from what all of them have said today is that it is extremely relevant to the here and now that we are confronting. Europe is a Schicksalgemeinschaft, a community of destiny, which respects the differences, the unity in diversity, which is the cliche that everyone uses, but I think is deeply true in so many ways. We have our histories, we have our distinguished differences in our food, in our art, in our literature, and yet somehow this continent has breathed in good ways and very evil ways in the past. The fact that a European Union exists and is the most successful peace project that the world has seen says something about it, notwithstanding the challenges that we have, and this corona has put another huge test to all of us. Your words, I think, have brought to us the understanding that if we don't talk to each other, if we don't see the common challenges that are across borders in so many different ways, we won't be able to make it out of the woods. I believe in Europe, as I think we all do. That's one of the things that brings us together. I do believe that we will muddle through and that Europe will survive. I think there's been too much doomsaying over the past 20 years. I've lived in Washington, where Americans have declared the end of Europe, the end of the Eurozone for many, many years. It's not to say that everything is rosy, far from it. And I declare myself as a cautious optimist on these issues. And we can only survive in this geopolitical world of uncertainty and volatility if we stick together. And the Europe's Futures Fellowship is a humble contribution in this regard, and I hope that we can build on it in the years to come. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Erste Foundation. Thank you to the Barca Media and to Igor, who was the mastermind, the metteur en scène, who has fortunately done and brought us together. Thanks to Dino Pašalić, my colleague, who is, fortunately today, he was not only behind the scenes, but on the screen. We'll meet you together, and hopefully you have a good end of the day and end of this month, and looking forward to some summer holidays, even if it's at home. Goodbye.
very little conflict with partisans.
Danke schön.
Soll ich dir noch eins geben?
Kleine.
Ja.
Melanzane mit Couscous. Kräutercouscous.